Hi, my name is Demetria, and I offer podcasting advice, strategies, and support for heart-aligned entrepreneurs who want to share their message with purpose, make an impact, and grow their network. Welcome to the show. You're listening to Soul Podcasting, episode 17. This podcast is sponsored by Faith Media and Impact Podcast Coach, which is a service that supports women podcasters to boldly share their voices and their powerful messages through the medium of podcasting. So find out more about podcast coaching services and courses by visiting impactpodcastcoach.com. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about booking awesome guests for your podcast, how to find those guests. On our last episode, we talked about the benefits of interviewing guests. So now we're going to talk about how to find them. Since I began podcasting in 2005, I've interviewed hundreds of guests, and it has been a blessing to speak with each and every one of them. I'm grateful for many of the conversations that I've had over 15 years ago and still hold firmly to much of the material, the content, and the advice that was given to me and my audience through my guests. So I find that having guests on my podcast has been really instrumental in my own business growth, my own mentality, my own spiritual growth. So if you are podcasting and just needing a little extra support in creating content, but need to continue creating that podcast every week or every couple of weeks, however often your production schedule is, and you just need people on your show that's going to help you run your show efficiently by offering your audience advice and support, then you'll want to have guests on your show on a regular basis. Some of you might not want that, and that's okay. But on the last episode, we talked about reasons why having guests can be so instrumental in how your show runs. And I also talked about how you've noticed, if you've been following this podcast for a little while, how up until now, I haven't had any guests on this particular podcast, but I do run 3 others where you'll hear loads of interviews on my Her Business Elevated podcast and Christian Homeschool Moms podcast, as well as Mompreneurs and Heals podcast. And those podcasts predominantly run on interviews just because of the nature of what I'm talking about, where I'm not teaching content per se, as I'm most likely to do on this show. So I just wanted to share that with you, how different podcasts have different agendas and missions, and you know what type of format you want to have on your show and what works best for you. But if you're thinking about booking guests for your show, then on this episode, that is exactly what I'm going to be sharing with you. So I'm going to go over a couple of steps to help you figure out what your process should be when looking to book a guest for your show. And the very first thing is going to be to determine your target audience. And that is always your basic, most essential thing that you have to do no matter what, is figure out who your audience is so that you can then determine what your audience wants from you and from your show and what they would want to hear your guests contribute to the show. So you have to consider your listeners' interests, their preferences, and the topics that they want to hear about. I like to occasionally run a survey, whether it's on Facebook or whether it is just an email that I send out to my listeners and ask them, what are some topics that you're thinking about that you want to hear about on the show? And from, even if it's just a handful of responses, you can then gauge kind of what your listener is feeling at the moment regarding your topic and maybe cater some of your content to them. You want your listeners, at any rate, to be interested in what you're providing. So this is not to put a cap on what you're able to provide on your show. You can talk about things that even have not been suggested or that nobody's ever said that they want to hear on your show. And it might end up being a topic that everybody loves once you've released the episode. So it's okay to branch out and try new things. But I would definitely start with asking your current listeners if you can at all reach out to them. If you've set up a system where they're a part of your mailing list or they're following you on social media and you know that these are actual listeners that are following my social channels, then reach out to them in however way is most convenient that you can reach your listener and ask them, What do you want to hear? What shows have been your favorite? What would you like to hear more of? So that's the first thing. And once your show starts to really develop into what it's going to feel like and how you want to present your material, then you'll want to research your potential guests. And you want to look for experts and influencers and thought leaders in your niche or your industry that aligns with your target audience's interests. So you want to consider individuals who have given talks, not necessarily TED Talks, but that's a great one to look for. If they've done TED Talks or some type of onstage speaking or have appeared in some form of media, maybe they've written books, or they've appeared on other podcasts, they have a strong online presence. These are kind of the potential guests that you want to look for, but you can also look for those who are bloggers or those who have a simple social media presence. It depends on the type of guest you want on your show. Maybe you need someone who's really going to just resonate with your listener, and maybe that type of person isn't going to be someone who has the biggest stage presence. Maybe there's someone who just has a social media presence that's really strong, maybe on Instagram or TikTok or something, but they have content that they share regularly that aligns with your message. Maybe you found what that person offers in their community to be really useful for what your community needs. So maybe they have a blog, or maybe they run their own podcast as well. So it's not necessarily that they have to be an author or be a thought leader in a traditional sense, but someone that offers something of great value, a message of value that aligns with your message, and that they have something to provide to your audience. So you can look for these type of guests. It's easy to look for them. Go to socials, go to Google, type in your keywords, find people who are aligning with your message, and just start asking. So before we get into developing a pitch, I'm going to tell you also another way that you can book guests is to put out a call. And I'm going to preface this with to be a little careful about this method of doing things, but I've done this a few times and I do always end up with some really great guests on my shows because of doing it this way. But you'll also risk receiving a lot of random responses. And it is also overwhelming because once you put out a call on a Facebook group, which is what I'm specifically referring to, then a lot of times you're going to be inundated with many requests at one time, probably so many that you can't respond to everyone. So there have been 3 times that I put out a request, and each of those times I've been met with 50 or more responses. And it's just a lot of keeping up with who has asked to be on the show and so forth. So I actually had to create a system so that I could easily vet the guests that I want on the show and scan their profiles really quickly just to make sure that their message aligns with mine. So I made sure each of them filled out a form that would let me know where I can find their information and find out more about them. It only takes me a little while to, once I'm on their website, really scan through the pages of their website. And they have to have a website. That's my first requirement. Otherwise, it's just socials. And so I'd like to see thought leaders who do have a website with a business or a ministry or something that they're offering to their audience. And so once I scan through their website, and it's very brief because I don't have a lot of time to do this, but I can get a feeling for whether or not they are going to be a good match for my show. And so once they pass that level, then I lead them to the second level, which is to give me more in-depth information through submitting their bios, their pictures, and signing my contract that I have with each guest. So I make sure that, if they're going to come on the show, they know kind of what is expected legally and that kind of thing. So I have some documentation for that as well. And then once we get through that step and they've agreed to all the terms and the document's been signed, then the next step is to book the time for the recording. So it is a lengthy process, but now that I've kind of systemized it, it's a lot quicker because we kind of automate the steps in the process at this point. And I've just had to learn as I go. And so I'm just letting you know that if you do put out a call in a Facebook group, you might get inundated and you will have to have some systems on the back end in order to respond quickly to everyone who you think is a good match to be on the show, and also to be able to reply to those who are not a good fit for your show. You can also put out a call on your Instagram or your blog, your newsletter, and these are going to be people that are already listening, so they may like to be on your show as well. So why not send a newsletter announcement asking if anyone is interested in being a guest on your show? Okay, so that's the way to research your potential guests and to get them booked. But before you get them officially booked, especially if you're not putting out a Facebook group call or so forth, you may want to send out an email one at a time to your specific potential guests, your prospects. So in this case, you're going to develop a compelling pitch, and you're going to create a really personalized pitch that communicates the value of your podcast and why this particular guest should consider appearing on your show. So you're going to highlight the benefits of reaching your audience, and this might be in the form of credibility or exposure or just the opportunity to share their expertise. So you're offering value. So highlight how that appearing on your podcast can benefit your guests. Again, reaching a new audience or promoting their latest work or establishing their authority in the industry. And then you need to emphasize then what value you can provide to them. So that's your compelling pitch. So figure out what that pitch is and kind of craft that so that you're ready to submit that same pitch to all of your potential guests that you would like on the show, but make sure it's personalized and that it's their name and their specialty. So I'm going to take a quick break here just to apologize if you hear any background noise, because I am amazed at how that as soon as I started the podcast, now I have this little bird. And it's somewhere I can't see the bird, but I know it's near my window and it's making a lot of little chirping noises, and it's kind of cute, but it's a bit distracting. So if you hear a little chirping in the background, that's a little birdie outside my window. All right. So the next thing you'll want to do once you've developed your pitch, you've found their information, you'll want to make sure you have the correct info. Locate this on their websites or social media profiles, or you might want to reach out to their publicists. But be professional, be respectful in your communication when contacting them. The next step is then to wait and see what happens. And if you don't hear anything back, you want to follow up. So politely follow up. If you don't have a response within a week or so, just send a polite follow-up message, because sometimes people get busy. And especially if you're looking at guests that you know are very desired in their niche and in their industry, they're going to be busy individuals. So they may miss or overlook those initial messages. So be very persistent, but always be respectful. Okay, now that you've gone through those things, once they do contact you and say, yes, they're interested, then again, make sure you have a system in place to get them onboarded. And that includes any contracts they need to sign and agreements. It includes gathering their bios, their pictures, all the information that they'll need for your show. You want to be flexible and accommodating is my next tip for you, because understanding that your potential guests have busy schedules is so important. So to find a time that works best for both parties, for you and your guest on different time zones, always use a scheduler, a booking scheduler, a calendar, such as Calendly is one example. I happen to use the scheduler in my HoneyBook account, but you need a scheduler so that they can easily book a time with you. And when they're booking this time with you, they're going to want to know if this is a video interview or an audio interview. So be very clear so that they're properly prepared for whether or not they're going to be showing up on camera. Make sure they know the amount of time that the interview will take so they can set aside that amount of time, right? They need to know if it's just going to be a 25 or 30-minute interview. Is this going to be a 45-minute interview? And so just being respectful of their time is very important. And then the next tip I have for you is to thoroughly prepare for your guest. Again, besides scheduling and preparing your guest for the interview in that way, you want to prepare for the actual interview. So you're going to be leading this, conducting this interview, and they need to know that you properly researched what they do. So you need to research their background, their expertise, any type of recent work they've done, any publications they've got, things that they might have coming down the pipeline, special events. You'll want to give them an opportunity to share those events, but you need to know enough about your guest that you're able to ask very pointed and quality questions that they're able to answer to the best of their ability and sharing the best of their knowledge and information and expertise to your audience. So asking the right questions is very important when interviewing. And lastly, show appreciation. After that interview, you're going to want to follow up with them at some point with a thank you note. I tend to let a little time slide in between when I do my thank you, and I probably should change that in the future. But the reason is that, I thank them thoroughly at the end of the interview. And then what I like to do is once their interview is scheduled and booked and ready to go, and they have a scheduled date for the interview, I will then thank them one final time with a massive email that shows all of the share links that I'm going to be using to share their interview, all the places they can find the interview. And I just give like a really big thank you at the very end. But it's a good idea to follow up soon after the interview to thank your guest. And then you'll want to always maintain a positive relationship with your guests because they may be willing to return or recommend your podcast to other people at some point. So that is something that you want to keep that open dialogue with them, always keeping that positive relationship. Gratitude means a lot in the podcasting world because we're taking time for each other. So as a guest, they're taking time aside to speak with you and your audience, which, they're not getting paid to do. So the only payment they have is the appreciation you show them and the whatever ability you have in your business and your organization to promote that guest. So your job is to be as thorough as possible with researching, make the process as easy and simple and streamlined as possible for your guest, and make them feel comfortable during the interview so that they're able to express themselves and give an awesome interview. And then at the end, you just want to make sure you're showing appreciation, make sure to stay professional and persistent, and build a strong and diverse lineup of guests. It's going to attract new listeners to your podcast and keep your existing audience engaged. So those are my tips for you with how to book an awesome guest for your podcast. I want you to let me know if any of these tips have been helpful to you, because I hope that you're able to find the courage and the inspiration to go out there and get those fabulous guests for your show. And if this is the direction you're going in, where you want to conduct interviews on your podcast and you're finding those fabulous guests and you really love this show, I hope that you'll write me and let me know that this episode has been helpful to you. One of the best ways that you can support this podcast besides writing to me, and I'll tell you how you can write to me in just a moment, but I'd love for you to support by heading over to Apple Podcasts and leaving a review in Apple Podcasts. If you're on your mobile device, just go to Soul Podcasting and scroll all the way down until you see the 5 stars and go ahead and give me that 5-star rating. Right underneath the 5 stars is an opportunity to write a review. You will see a link that says write a review, and go ahead and click on that, and it gives you room to type in a response. So go ahead and write your review and then leave your name on the review. And if you run a podcast, I would love for you to share that as well on the review so that I can read it out loud on this show. I love the review I received back in February by Jay Lentz, author, and it says, "Just what I needed for my podcast. So approachable, a great podcast, just what you would expect from someone giving podcast tips. Can't wait for more tips. Just what I needed." So I'm grateful for that review and glad that you think this is an approachable podcast. And I can't wait to hear from each of you who are listening. Love for you to leave a review, and the place for you to reply to me if you want to send me an email or you want to reach out and chat, you can go to impactpodcastcoach.com. There is a place for you to contact me. Just reach out by going to the contact page and you'll find out how to reach me. And also, you could email me. I'll go ahead and give that email address right here because I know for some of you who are email people and just need a really, really quick way to shoot something out to me, you can reach me at my full name, Demetria.Zinga@impactpodcastcoach.com. Okay, that's Demetria.Zinga@impactpodcastcoach.com. And that is all for now. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I look forward to sharing more with you next time, all about podcasting. So have a wonderful day and rest of your week, and to your podcasting success.